For some 50 years after World War II, the military balance of power in the Asia-Pacific region remained relatively stable, dominated by a substantial US presence. But all of that has been changing. Fears of North Korean belligerence, a build-up of the US presence, a resurgent China, and Japan's apparent determination to end its policy of pacifism have raised new fears about an arms race in the region. I'm Taimur Nabili, and in this edition of 101 East, we ask, will a move to militarism by Japan spark tension in the region, or is China the real threat to peace? Japan is, in theory, a pacifist nation, severely restricted by its constitution in how and for what purpose it can use military force. But despite this, the country has the world's fifth largest military spending budget, and its supposedly defense-only armed forces have a remarkably powerful offensive capability. Now, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe wants to abandon the commitment to pacifism by changing the constitution. Fazia Ibrahim reports.
Kamikaze pilots, a symbol of Japan's past military might. This icon of Japanese history is being immortalized in a film aptly titled, I Go to Die for You. It's a tribute to those who died serving Imperial Japan.
I'm not admiring the wall as an event, but it is a historical fact that there was a group of young people between 18 and 20 years old who died. I want viewers to think about them. Japan is now enjoying peace because of those people.
But victims of Japan's military might will not share the same sentiment. For many Asian countries, particularly China and South Korea, Japanese imperialism is still a very painful living history. Japan's neighbors take every opportunity to remind Tokyo of the deathly impact of its war actions. But a new Japan is emerging, one that no longer wants to cower under the shame of its past. This is a Japan in touch with the realities of today's world.
Things are not heading in a positive direction. Terrorism can be found in every country in the world. I think things are heading in a bad direction. Under the current circumstances, we have to have practical power to avoid the threats.
In our case, North Korea is, the kidnapping people. People know that, and they shoot missiles towards our territory. So now people are getting more and more concerned about national security.
China's growing military threat is another reason Japan wants to revise Article 9 in its constitution. The statement renounces war and promises the country will not use force as a means of settling international disputes. Tokyo tested the limits of Article 9 when it sent non-combat troops to Iraq from 2004 and 2006. The soldiers served as part of the US-led coalition, providing humanitarian aid projects. But Article 9 meant they were helpless in defending themselves under fire.
Very frustrating, the imbalancing, so that people want to change. But the fact is that you are attacked by the terrorists, then the Americans or Australians or British will come to help us, but we cannot go. That's really, that's not the same.
This is one of Japan's Aegis destroyers, touted as the most advanced fighting ships in the world. In January next year, it's scheduled to be involved in the first Japan-US joint missile defense exercise at sea. Washington would like to see its Asian allies shoulder more of the burden of regional security. But critics say changing the pacifist stance at the behest of the US is a mistake.
The United States wants to change of the Constitution of Japan now to open up a way to make a kind of Pax Americana all over the world.
The most vocal opposition against changing Article 9 comes from those who remember the effects of World War II. For them, a remilitarized Japan would not serve any purpose.
The only possible way for Japan to survive is to follow the peaceful means, two peaceful ways. This is most idealistic, at the same time this is most realistic.
Joining me for our discussion today are three eminent guests. Hisahiko Okazaki is the head of the think tank, the Okazaki Institute, and an advisor to Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. He joins us from Tokyo. In New York, we have Robert DUJARRIC, the director of the Institute of Contemporary Japan Studies at Temple University in Japan. And here with me in the studios, Dr. Lee MINGJIANG from the Rajaratnam School of International Studies in Singapore. Gentlemen, thank you all for joining us on the program today. Mr. Okazaki, let me begin with you, if I might. Japan has enjoyed, for the past 60 years, tremendous economic, social advancement, and it's all been under a pacifist constitution that pledges itself to not taking military action. Why is it that suddenly the mood of the country seems to have turned aggressive?
Well, actually, that's the assessment of the situation is not accurate. Actually, we strengthened our military forces, and mostly during the 1990s. It was to counter the tremendous Soviet threat. And actually, in the past 10 years, I have a defense white paper here, and our military budget is declining every year. And also percentage occupied by the military budget and in the total budget is declining. So we are somewhat being demilitarized. And during the 10 years, from 1997, Chinese growth was tremendous. Every year, double-digit increase.
Robert DUJARRIC, let me come to you. Mr. Okazaki there spoke of threat, spoke of relative military strength. Clearly, one of the first battles in the whole Asian situation in this discussion is going to be how we frame the conversation, isn't it? The Americans and to a certain extent the Japanese want the lead line in media coverage to always be the threat from China, whereas for China, it's much more a question of the threat from the increasing alliances between the US, Japan, Singapore, Australia, India, that are the real threat.
I think the basic framework is that, in fact, we're in a fairly stable situation. I think most of the major players in Northeast Asia know that the chances of a military conflict are fairly small. The relationship between the major players is actually not that bad. I think to go back to the point that Ambassador Okazaki made is very much right, that Japan's military spending actually has been declining. What has happened is that, unfortunately, the attitude of the Japanese government towards the history issue, the Yasukuni Shrine, the sex slaves during World War II, has made a lot of observers believe that Japan is remilitarizing, is aggressive, which is totally not the case.
Well, let me put it another way. You say Japan's military spending has been declining, and Lee MINGJIANG, let me put this question to you. It's true, Japan's military spending has been declining. China's military spending has been increasing. Yes. Having said that, Japan still spends some $40 billion, which for a pacifist nation is a remarkable amount of money. China spends $45 billion. When you have a population in Japan of something like 127 million and a population in China of 1.1 billion, you can't really say that Japan should be worried about a decline in military spending. Isn't that a wrong way to look at it?
Well, yes. Well, you don't just look at the decrease of military spending in Japan, but you look at still the total sum of money that's spending on its military, but also look at the intentions or behaviors. That's something that China is worried. As Ambassador Okazaki mentioned, a lot of the military buildup in Japan occurred in the 1990s. But why it was not a worry, a big concern for China back then, but now it's an increasing concern for China? Well, to explain that, you have to look at the changing context, the framework.
Okay, let me stop you there. We will look at the changing context and the changing framework in just a moment. We're going to have to take a short break. We will continue the discussion in just a couple of moments. And We'll bring you a look at how the Japanese self-defense force is attracting greater numbers of young people. Back in a moment.